I just don't like it when you get in my way of my pictures.
This is where troubled pop star Britney Spears is now, a psychiatric ward at the UCLA Medical Center. She was whisked there early Thursday in a caravan of emergency vehicles for what one officer said was an effort to get help.
Britney Spears didn't just lose control. That's the version people were sold. The reality is a lot more uncomfortable.
You gonna go for a walk?
Now, we all know the story of Britney as it has been told and retold to death. But what hasn't been discussed in nearly enough detail is why Britney ended up the way she did. She was 26 years old and at the peak of her commercial value when Britney would sign the paperwork that legally removed her right to make a single decision about her own life. And the people who filed that paperwork weren't strangers who had forced their way into her life. They were the same team that had been managing her since she was a child. Britney Spears didn't break down. She was broken. Not by fame, not by pressure, but by a system that built her, controlled her, and didn't know how to function without her. Because at her peak, Britney Spears wasn't just a pop star. She was one of the most valuable products in the world. And when that product stopped behaving the way it was supposed to, everything started to fall apart. This is not the story you have already seen. This is the story about the contracts signed before she was old enough to understand them, the team that profited from her compliance, and the legal structure that made sure, when she finally pushed back, they could make it permanent. This is how the music industry broke Britney Spears. In 1999, Britney Spears sold 25 million copies of her debut album. She was 17 years old. By 2003, she was the highest-earning female artist on the planet. Pepsi campaigns, sold-out world tours, her face on every magazine cover in every country simultaneously. Managed by the same team since she was a child, signed to a label that had structured her contract before she was legally old enough to fully understand it. From the outside, it looked like the beginning of something extraordinary. From the inside, the cage was already being built. The machinery behind her was generating hundreds of millions of dollars. And that word, machinery, is the one this entire story turns on. Because here is what most people never think to ask. If Britney was generating that kind of money, who was actually receiving it?
Just keep moving, guys. Just keep moving. Don't block our path. You're gonna fall. You're gonna fall.
Watch out, do.
The smile was real. The talent was real. But almost everything around it, the image, the narrative, the carefully managed contradictions, was engineered. And the people doing the engineering had a financial interest in making sure it never stopped. What that engineering looked like in practice, and how early it started, is the part of this story that changes everything. Here is where the official story and the real story start to diverge. Britney was signed to Jive Records at 15 years old. Her management contract was with Larry Rudolph, who had been with her since she was shopping demos as a teenager. Both deals were signed before she had the experience, the legal counsel, or frankly the age to fully understand what they meant. And the details of those contracts, once you see them clearly, reframe every single thing that happens after. Standard music industry practice, which is exactly the problem.
Even you look at the guys now, that's probably big right now with social media. I just seen they had NBA Youngboy. He's the biggest YouTuber influencer as far as music. He did a deal for $2 million for 5 records. So think about that. You got the money up front, but imagine what they get. We have to teach that to the next generation. Look at the bigger picture. Don't just look at the now.
Here is how a standard major label deal worked in the late 1990s. The label funds everything. Recording, videos, marketing, tour support, press, all of it is classified as an advance. All of it needs to be paid back, Not by the label, but by the artist, before the artist sees a single dollar in royalties. Meanwhile, the label keeps between 80 and 90% of every record sold. The artist keeps the rest, out of which they pay their manager, their lawyer, their publicist, their team. By the time Britney's debut album had sold 25 million copies worldwide, one of the fastest-selling debuts in pop history, the label had recouped everything and was generating pure profit. Britney was still in recoupment. Read that again. 25 million copies. Still in recoupment. Keep that number in mind, because the next figure makes even less sense.
I think since the conservatorship, I'm in a conservatorship, is the third year of me being under that, and I felt like a lot of the things were planned for me to do, and being told what to do, and I was just like, for this one, I want to make it my baby, and I want to do it myself, and I was very strategic about the way I did it.
And this is the part that changes the shape of everything that follows. Because the conversation around Britney has almost always focused on her behavior, her mental health, her relationships. The financial architecture underneath her career, the contracts, the recoupment clauses, the management fees, the ownership structures, has never received the same scrutiny, which is convenient for the people who designed it. By the time she released Oops, I Did It Again in 2000, Britney was the most commercially dominant pop artist in the world. That album moved 1.3 million copies in its first week in the United States alone. The tour that followed grossed over $40 million, and Britney's personal financial picture during this period, once you look at the actual structure of the deals, remains almost impossible to reconcile with those numbers. We'll come back to why that matters, because it connects directly to what happens in 2008 in a way that has never been publicly explained. But the financial contracts were only part of the system. The other part was the image. From the very beginning, Britney had been sold to the public as a living contradiction. Innocent but suggestive, wholesome but provocative. The girl next door who somehow also sold sexuality without ever being allowed to own it.
Yeah, it was weird. Let's give it
I have to ask a couple of things about Justin.
Okay, of course.
He just got on television and pretty much said you broke his heart. You did something that caused him so much pain, so much suffering. What did you do?
I was upset. For a while.
This contradiction was not accidental. It was the product. And maintaining that product required something most people never considered. It required Britney's complete compliance. Not just professionally, personally.
But you hope that you'll remain a virgin until you get married.
Yeah, my mom always told me, once you have sex with a guy that, you're with or whatever, it's like so many more emotions are involved and everything gets like, crazy and twisted.
That's what Britney told me last August. 9 months later, Us Weekly's Todd Gold posed the same question.
She was asked about her virginity in almost every major interview she gave between 1999 and 2003. By journalists, on camera, to her face. And she answered, every time, patiently, because that was what was required of her. The team around her had built a narrative in which her sexuality was simultaneously her biggest commercial asset and something she was not permitted to own or define on her own terms. The team that profited from her compliance. And when that compliance started to slip, when Britney made a single decision entirely on her own terms, watch what happened. When her relationship with Justin Timberlake ended, and he released a song that publicly implied she had been unfaithful, her team's response was silence. Not a statement, not a rebuttal, silence. Because the narrative of Britney as someone who could not be fully trusted, who was perhaps not quite what she appeared, was, for certain people in her orbit, more useful than the alternative.
When you become a product of the media's rumor mill, you kind of get this thing about you. And I've always had a little bit of a dark side, so it was just a chance for me to use it. It was a chance for me to, do a little reversing. And you know, like I said before, the video is open for anybody's interpretation. You can think or feel whatever you want from it. I know when I made it, I had a sense of humor about it.
For the first time, Britney was the villain in someone else's story, and the machinery that had spent 5 years building her up offered her no protection when the narrative turned against her. That is not an oversight. That is a choice. And it is the first time you can see the system's priorities clearly. The asset was protected when it was performing. The person was not. Which takes us to the moment that makes everything else make sense. By 2004, something had quietly shifted. Not in Britney's talent, not in her commercial value. Both of those remained intact. What shifted was her relationship with the machinery itself. In January 2004, she married her childhood friend Jason Alexander in Las Vegas. No press preparation, no management approval, no narrative control. Just a decision she made for herself. It lasted 55 hours. Her team had it annulled before the press cycle could fully form around it. Now here is what most people missed about that moment. Not the marriage, the annulment. Because what the annulment revealed, very quietly, very quickly, was the precise boundary of Britney's autonomy. She could perform on any stage in the world. She could generate hundreds of millions of dollars for the people around her. She could be photographed, interviewed, and presented to the public in whatever configuration her team required. But a decision made entirely on her own terms, spontaneous, unmanaged, authentically hers, lasted less than 3 days before the system corrected it.
Before Christmas Eve, I mean, you guys have been friends long. Was there romance? Was there love before?
Definitely, there's probably been some romance there, but nothing like boyfriend girlfriend type thing ever. It was just more of a friendship, a good real relationship, and it led to a one-night marriage in Vegas, I guess.
And once you see that, you cannot unsee it. Because here is the pattern that the timeline reveals. Every moment in Britney's career where she exercised genuine autonomy, a marriage her team didn't sanction, a relationship they couldn't monetize, a public statement that went off script, was followed quickly and quietly by a correction, a clarification, a reframing, a return to the approved narrative. For years, these corrections looked like crisis management. Looking back, they look like something else entirely. They look like a system enforcing its own boundaries. And by 2006, Britney had been inside that system for over a decade. She had been famous since she was a child. She had never negotiated her own contract. She had never controlled her own image. She had never, in her adult life, made a significant decision that the machinery around her had not either approved or overridden. Which means that what happens next is not a surprise. Not if you have been paying attention. Because the system had one move left, and it was the one nobody was supposed to talk about. By 2006, Britney's personal life had become the product. Her marriage to Kevin Federline was turned into a reality television series. Her pregnancies were front-page news. Her parenting was scrutinized in real time by a press corps that had been following her every move for nearly a decade. She had been famous since she was a child. She had never, in her adult life, existed outside of the machinery. And in February 2007, something broke. The images went global within hours, and the media response was immediate and almost entirely focused on one question. What is wrong with her?
God! She is completely bald.
Britney Spears came in and sat in my chair and said, "I want to shave my hair off." And I said, "Well, I'm not shaving your hair off." And I tried to talk her out of it. I said, "Are you sure you're not having a bad day and tomorrow you'll feel differently about it? Why don't we wait a little bit?"
Almost nobody asked the other question, the one that this entire video has been building toward. What has been done to her? In September 2007, she performed at the MTV Video Music Awards. The performance was uneven. She looked distracted. The choreography was hesitant. The press described it as a public meltdown.
All right, now to that breaking news from overnight. It looks like that slow motion tragedy that is Britney Spears' personal life has just accelerated. First responders were reportedly called to a hotel in LA overnight after guests called the police thinking Spears was having a mental health crisis. It all started around 10:30 p.m.
Then, a judge awarded primary custody of her children to Kevin Federline. Then, in January 2008, a custody dispute escalated inside her home until police were called, and she was taken out on a stretcher. To the cameras that were already waiting. Within 72 hours of that night, her father, Jamie Spears, filed for an emergency conservatorship. The filing was approved in days. A conservatorship is a legal arrangement typically reserved for people with severe cognitive decline or debilitating mental illness. People who cannot, in the most basic sense, function independently. Britney Spears, who weeks earlier had been completing complex choreography across a world tour, was placed under one. She could no longer access her own bank account. She could no longer make medical decisions for herself. She could no longer hire or fire the people managing her career. The legal structure that made sure, when she finally pushed back, they could make it permanent. Because look at who now had legal authority over every decision in Britney's life. That last one is important, because the people managing her career were now, legally, her conservators. The same team, the same structure. Now with the full force of the legal system behind them. And what happened next is the part that should have generated far more scrutiny than it ever did.
The people who did this to me should not get away and be able to walk away so easily. Recap. I was on tour in 2018. I was forced to do. My management said if I don't do this tour, I will have to find an attorney, and by contract, my own management could sue me if I didn't follow through with the tour.
Within months of being legally declared incapable of managing her own life, Britney Spears was back on stage. New album, global promotion, and then a 4-year Las Vegas residency that would generate over $130 million. She was performing 8 shows a week, executing complex routines, meeting contractual obligations across multiple international markets. And here is the contradiction that nobody in the industry was asked to explain publicly. The same legal system that said she could not manage her own life was simultaneously allowing the people who controlled her life to book her for one of the most demanding performance schedules in Las Vegas history. She was legally incapable of deciding what to spend her own money on, but she was legally capable of generating $130 million for the people who controlled it. That is not a contradiction the system ever satisfactorily explained, and it is the one that tells you everything you need to know about who this system was actually designed to protect. In November 2021, after 13 years, the conservatorship was terminated.
Britney Spears has been freed from a conservatorship that has controlled her personal life and money for nearly 14 years. A Los Angeles judge made the long-awaited decision Friday. The pop star had been under the oversight of her father, Jamie Spears, until he was removed from the conservatorship in September. Carter Evans has more from outside the courthouse, where fans are celebrating.
The judge dissolved it in a hearing that lasted less than 30 minutes. Britney was legally free. The people who had designed, filed, maintained, and profited from that conservatorship for 13 years faced no criminal charges, no professional consequences. Several of them continue to work in the music industry today. The conservatorship is the part of this story that became public, the part that generated documentaries and hashtags and congressional hearings. But here is what those documentaries didn't go back far enough to show. The conservatorship did not emerge from nowhere. It was built on top of a career that had been structured from the very beginning in a way that concentrated power in the hands of the people around her and away from Britney herself. The contract signed when she was 15. The image she was required to perform and was never permitted to own. The financial architecture that ensured the money she generated never fully reached her. The narrative apparatus that turned her personal life into a product and offered her no protection when that product became inconvenient. 3 things. Exactly the 3 things we told you about at the beginning. And every single one of them was in place long before 2008, long before the conservatorship, long before the cameras were waiting outside her house. The conservatorship was not an aberration. It was the system showing its final form. And Britney Spears was not uniquely vulnerable to that system. She was simply the most famous person it consumed. Which means the real question, the one this story forces you to sit with, is not what happened to Britney. It is how many names you have never heard. Because the contracts that governed her career in 1999 were not written specifically for her. They were industry standard. The system that broke Britney Spears didn't disappear when the conservatorship ended. The machinery is still running. The names just change.